Side note, Conviction doesn't like being run on Windows 11. I tried some methods to fix that, but none were complete solutions. So if you notice some stuttering, that's not the video, nor is it on your end. Conviction sought to streamline the gameplay of Splinter Cell and incorporate more action. So, right off the bat, there are many mechanics missing from previous entries. You can't move bodies of enemies after they have been defeated. You can still grab them and move them that way, however, which is odd because that means you can still technically move them to avoid detection or use them to gain an enemy's attention, but only before he's dead, not after. You have no options for non-lethal attacks or weapons. Every enemy Sam defeats in this game is a confirmed kill. In previous games, non-lethal attacks were harder to pull off and more limiting, but killing less enemies gave you a better rating. There's no statistics at the end of levels or any rating system, so this hurts replay value. You can't hide in or under certain objects, so you mostly just have to stick to the shadows and use pipes. You can't pick up and throw items like cans or bottles to distract enemies, so you have less options for manipulating their placement. You can't perform the split jump anymore in narrow hallways. Now, to be fair, Sam's movement options in this game are much bigger compared to previous ones, but I still miss this. There's no minigames like hacking or lockpicking, and probably the biggest thing omitted is that you can't whistle anymore to attract enemies. One of the best additions that Pandora Tomorrow made. So once again, you have less options to manipulate enemies. Night vision and different vision goggles are gone, and now you just have the sonar goggles, which allow you to see through walls because being able to see enemies through walls in a stealth game was popular at the time. I do think this game does it somewhat better though, because in most of those games there's no reason why you wouldn't have this vision on at all times. Some try to limit it with meters, but Conviction limits it with movement. If you stand still, then the image is clear, but if you move around, then it becomes fuzzy, and the faster you move, it becomes worse. Plus, it takes a second to find enemies, so it's not instant. And of course, there's no light meter or sound meter, which Double Agent version 1 already omitted. So instead of a meter showing you how visible you are with different levels, now it's just, hey, if the game is in color, then you're visible from a mile away. If the game is black and white, then nobody can see you unless they are right in your face. There's also no movement speed changes. In previous games you had 4 different movement speeds when crouching and standing, which also made different amounts of noise. In this game there's only 1 crouch speed and 2 standing speeds. The removal of these mechanics takes away depth to the game and less ways to play around levels and enemies. Since you have very few options for distracting them, they mostly just function as bollards with guns. Especially with the change in how their detection works. In previous Splinter Cell games, if an enemy thought it saw you, it would investigate the area and try to find you, and you would only be spotted if it had a confirmed visual on Sam. In Conviction, it was changed to a detection meter, in which staying in the enemy's line of sight for too long will get you detected. On realistic difficulty, this fills up very quickly, so as a result, you don't have too many cases of enemies checking out disturbances. If they notice a window is open or a light is turned off, then they will investigate, so you're not completely out of situations like this or options for manipulating their routes and positioning, but it's much more limited. There's also no consequence for getting spotted. In Splinter Cell 1 and Pandora Tomorrow, getting spotted too many times will fail the mission. In Chaos Theory and Double Agent, getting spotted too many times will not fail the mission, but enemies will start wearing bulletproof helmets and armor and will take defensive positions in rooms, making it harder to get through the level. In Conviction, nothing happens if you get spotted. You can just run away and try again. And just like Double Agent version 1, having a binary stealth system where I am either completely visible or invisible means that it's very easy to stay hidden in the game by just staying in the shadows. And this is easy to do because of how big the environments are and how many light sources can be shot out. In previous games, some areas of the map make it easier to be seen than others, and sometimes you're in an area where you're not completely invisible, but you're also not super obvious to enemies. So you would have to work with the idea that maybe the enemy can see you, maybe he can't, and you have to play around that ambiguity. But it wasn't completely ambiguous because of the light meter displaying information to you, so you could consistently rely on it to make decisions. It struck a good balance. And it meant that leaving the shadows wasn't always a bad option and came with the risk of being seen but with the reward of better movement and positioning. In Conviction, because the system is binary, an office lamp lights you up just as much as a Christmas tree would, so it limits any risk-reward options for the light and shadows being used. And since there's no sound meter in which the game tells you the current volume of the room you're in, and so as long as you stay below it you won't be heard, it means the game can't have any interesting use of the gameplay mechanics. There's sections in Chaos Theory and Double Agent version 2 where the room you're in is loud, so you can move faster and do noisier stuff without being detected, but other rooms are very quiet, so you have to be more careful. It's a great way to get a variety of situations out of the same gameplay mechanics. Does Conviction at least add new mechanics of its own? Sort of. If you get detected, your last known position will be shown, giving you an idea of where enemies are heading and where they will be shooting. The biggest addition to the gameplay is the mark and execute mechanic, where if Sam performs a melee takedown on an enemy, he can now mark multiple targets and perform an execute move where he shoots them all in the head and kills them. You can mark up to 4 targets as well. There are some limitations, as you have to be able to see the target to perform this, but otherwise you can just clear entire rooms easily, and it only takes 1 melee to replenish. Also, when you get the sonar goggles, you can mark through walls. There are story sections in the game where Sam is beating information out of somebody, and you can interact with different objects in the environment to get unique animations of Sam just going to town on the informant, and I do get a kick out of seeing a ruthless Sam with nothing to lose, just letting out all of his rage. But the problem is that in terms of gameplay, they don't do much. You don't have to interrogate enemies in specific ways to get information. You just keep pressing the button. So whilst all of these animations are fancy, it's all window dressing. It's basically a cutscene that occasionally requires you to press a few buttons. Also, they can't be skipped, and this hurts replay value for some of the missions because you have to go through this canned section before getting back to the game. This ruins gameplay density. On a first-time playthrough, they can be pretty cathartic, but otherwise you will quickly realize how hollow this system is. You can pick up enemy weapons now, but I never really did that because my weapons were always better and I never ran out of ammo. Speaking of which, you can find weapon stashes throughout the levels, and this just breaks the gameplay further. So in previous Splinter Cell games such as Chaos Theory, you can choose between a stealth loadout, an assault loadout, or an in-between, so you have some options, although the game would sometimes just give you a set loadout. In Conviction, you can choose your primary and secondary weapon and upgrade it. My first impression was, oh, this is cool, this adds a bunch of options to fit my playstyle. But no, it's hollow. First of all, unless you're trying to challenge yourself, you will just go for the weapon with the best stats. If you're playing stealth, why would you choose anything but the 5.7 pistol? It can mark and execute 4 targets at once. Why would I be concerned about how much damage it does when I'm going for headshots? And for my secondary, why would I choose anything but the suppressed MP5 with the scope? It has the best range, and I can stealth with it. Once again, the other weapons might do more damage, but I'm going for headshots. So there's no decision making with the stash if you're playing stealth. As soon as you get the 5.7 and the suppressed MP5, just upgrade them to the max and that's it. That's all you'll ever need. If you're playing this as an action game, there's a few more options, but it just boils down to use the Desert Eagle and the FAMAS or the Benelli M3 shotgun. Shotguns in this game shred through anything, so most of the weapons here are useless and are just novelty. Therefore, this entire system is rendered useless other than the ability to refill ammo and gadgets. Infinitely. Yes, you can run back and refill as many times as you want, so you can go crazy spraying ammo all over the place and then just return to the stash, which would be bad enough because it discourages item management, but you can refill the gadgets infinitely. And in this game, you have grenades, flashbangs, remote mines, proximity mines, EMP grenades, and remote EMPs, which can also stun enemies if you're in a bad spot. So as you can see here, I can just keep bombing the place with proximity mines until everyone is dead, and if I run out, I can go refill at the stash, and no new enemies will spawn in to combat this. So you can beat a lot of encounters in this game by just gadget spamming, and the game does nothing to prevent this. And this technically counts as stealth because I didn't get detected. Previous Splinter Cell games would occasionally give you a refill on ammo and gadgets, but it wasn't a full refill. It would be another magazine of ammo, or one more of a specific gadget. It would not fully refill all of your inventory. So the weapon stash trivializes a lot of encounters, and you might say, well, just don't play the game that way then. The problem with that is it's not the player's responsibility to prevent exploits or play the game correctly, it's the developers. And this isn't some crazy tech or glitch that requires skill to pull off. This is an intended mechanic. The only enemies that can somewhat stand a chance is the third echelon agents because they can see you in the dark, but they barely appear in the game and you can just spam gadgets on them. Ubisoft also had the brilliant idea to have pistols that have unlimited ammo, so even if the weapon stash wasn't a problem, you could kill everyone with the pistol and only occasionally use another weapon or gadget when really needed. Since you don't have to worry about wasting ammo, there's no situations like in previous games where, I could shoot this guy for an easy kill, or I could melee him and save the ammo. Guns are also way more accurate in this game compared to older entries. Older Splinter Cell games had guns that were inaccurate to a comedic degree, unless it's the SC40K scoped. This worked for balancing as it made it harder to just shoot everyone from range. You had to be at a good distance for the shot to be viable, and even then it might be a better idea to just melee him, but melee had the risk of being seen. In Conviction, you can shoot guys from a large distance very easily, and if not, it usually isn't too hard to close the distance. Scoped weapons are very situational, especially since aiming the gun locks onto the guy's head and there's no option to disable that, even on mouse and keyboard. And if you're spotted, you can easily just bail out or fight your way out. So what this means is that Conviction is not only a less deep and complex game than the previous entries, it's also way easier than previous Splinter Cell games, which leads to it being a lackluster stealth game, and that's kind of sad to say. If they wanted to remove so many mechanics and streamline the gameplay, fine, I guess. They could have made up for it by making Conviction a much harder and challenging game or added new mechanics that take the place of that. But it's the easiest game in the series, even on the highest difficulty. Now, what if you play Splinter Cell Conviction as a third-person shooter? It fares better. Something I haven't talked about yet is the controls and movement. Fisher in Conviction is butter smooth and responsive. He has multiple movement options, cover is snappy, and so is moving in between. And the shooting and aiming is all terrific. The only complaint I have is that rolling and cover are the same button, so there's times where I want Fisher to roll, but he takes cover instead, and this has gotten me spotted. And the way you interact with objects is also strange. In previous games, if you were near an object, the game would bring up a window where you hold down a button and select which action you want from the menu. Conviction removed this and just made it so that whatever you're looking at when you press the action button will do the action, which has led to instances of the wrong action being done because the game thought I was looking at something else. But otherwise, Conviction has some of the best third-person movement I've felt in a game. The problem is that it's only slightly harder if you play it as an action game. Sam dies very easily on realistic difficulty, but you can grab human shields to prevent that, and it gives the opportunity to mark more targets for instant deaths. And because the enemies are meant to work like a stealth game, it means you can easily flank and kill them. To their credit, they will try to flank you too and throw grenades to flush you out, but you can avoid this with no difficulty or just use gadgets to bail. And if you're spotted, it can sometimes make it easier to clear a room than if you tried to stealth it because the enemies will just keep moving in on you. Basically, the fun ways to play Conviction are the riskiest ways but the least rewarding. The boring ways to play are the most rewarding, and the game doesn't even try to combat that. So, unfortunately, despite solid controls, movement, and shooting, Splinter Cell Conviction's gameplay is lackluster both as an action game and as a stealth game. There is fun to be had, but you have to go out of your way to do it, which should not be the player's job. It should not be my job to make the game fun and/or challenging. And, unfortunately, this bleeds over into the level design. To do a fairly concise rundown for the sake of time, the opening Market Street level is mostly just a tutorial, not really much to say. It tells the mechanics effectively, I guess, but in terms of gameplay, it's just a street you walk down. Coben's mansion opens up more with bigger rooms and more guards, but some sections like the garage heavily prefer taking the stairs over the main area, so even if you do have multiple options, you have one that outweighs the others by a mile. Price Airfield is too flat to be interesting, and it's way too easy to flank around and shoot, whether you're going stealth or action. The Highway of Death is a flashback to 1991 where you play the entire section as a third-person shooter, but with more limited movement, because you're playing as Victor Cost and not Sam. Some people dislike this level. I actually quite enjoy it. Since you can't stealth it, you're encouraged to make the most of the flanking routes and surprising the enemy, and since you can't bail out of bad situations as easily, it means you have to commit to your decisions way more. It's the one part of the game where I feel like the action mechanics found their home. On realistic, you can die very quickly, so you can be mobile, but you can't be mindless. The enemies die just as quickly, so it's fair. The Washington Monument is lame. You just run around and interrogate 3 guys, meet up with Victor Cost, and then shoot your way out in a very railroaded corridor. It goes on for too long, it has 0 replay value, and doesn't take advantage of the game's mechanics. The White Box Laboratories is really good. The level is dense with guards and light sources, some of which are permanent, and the level is more focused on scaling the building, which allows for verticality. This leads to interesting ways to play, whether it's stealth or action. If you're playing stealth, then you have more ways to sneak around. If you're playing action, you have more flanking opportunities. The Lincoln Memorial is just a story sequence with a shootout at the end. It's boring and has no replay value, and the shootout can be easily avoided just by hanging off this ledge. The developers really didn't account for this. Third Echelon HQ is pretty good. It starts off with an instant fail stealth section if you're detected, before then moving into a quick action section, before letting you play the rest of the level however you want. They also throw in these third echelon agents which can see you in the dark, so they pose a bigger threat. And this is also the level where you get the sonar goggles. There's a laser grid that you have to pass through, which on repeat playthroughs just becomes tedious and mind-numbing. The ending of the mission gives you unlimited and automatic mark and execute whilst leaving the building, and my favorite way to play this is to get a shotgun beforehand and slow walk. The Michigan Ave Reservoir is a letdown. It has the same issue that even though there are multiple paths, one of them beats the rest. Why would I take the path on the right with limited sightlines on the ground, when I can take the pipe on the left which gives me a better view and prevents anyone from seeing me? The rest of the mission is too flat and the environments are too small to do anything engaging with them, either action or stealth-wise, and the level concludes with a helicopter firing at Fisher, which would be interesting if it wasn't so easy to run through, even on realistic. Downtown District is very short and is pretty much just a street. The layout of guards isn't too bad, but the movement options make it really easy to run right past everything. The White House is the final level and technically the most challenging, but that's front-loaded. The opening section is actually pretty hard if you're not using gadgets. Once you're inside though, you have the upper hand in every circumstance. Even when a squad of enemies are hunting you down, you can just climb up a pole to shoot them all. And the rest of the encounters are just corridors with enemies. Not a very climactic or interesting way to cap off the game. The final encounter is just a couple of dudes in a room you can pick off in seconds. It's not a final stealth encounter with a lot of options, or a final action sequence, it's just a room. So out of 11 missions, the only ones that are any good are Coben's Mansion, the Highway of Death, White Box Laboratories, Third Echelon HQ, and maybe the White House if you want to be generous. That's only 4 or 5 missions of the game that make the most out of the gameplay mechanics. The rest are just uninspired and dull, or story sequences disguised as levels. And even then, some people don't like the Highway of Death level, so yeah. On top of that, there's a lot of story sections in these levels that can't be skipped and break the gameplay density by forcing the player to go through them every single time. Price Airfield requires you to go through this 5-minute long sequence of Sam being interrogated and then slapping Grim before you can play it. White Box Laboratories forces you to watch this minute-long interaction before you can start, and the mission before that is just a bunch of linear platforming. Third Echelon HQ requires you to slow walk to the desk and watch this cutscene, interact with this guy for a minute, interrogate Coben for 2 minutes, and then watch this 3-minute long cutscene each time you play the mission. Downtown District has this minute-long cutscene you need to watch before you start. I could go on, but you get the point. There are so many constant interruptions of gameplay for the sake of story, and it drives me nuts. Have the cutscenes be skippable, please. This just makes me not want to replay the game. Previous games occasionally had this, but it was nowhere near as egregious. Even Double Agent with its numerous scripted sections wasn't this bad. But like I said, even the good levels in this game can be easily exploited with the mechanics. There's so many times I would walk through an area after I had finished it and I would find cool areas to crawl under the floor or additional rooms in the back, which could have made for an engaging stealth or action sequence, but why would I do that when I can just spam gadgets and kill everything with no challenge? So, Conviction's level design is mostly mediocre with only a couple of good missions which have a lack of gameplay density anyway. And it wouldn't matter even if the game had the best designed stealth levels because the mechanics would override any of that. Conviction has a couple bonus modes, and to be honest, they're the best parts of the game. Hunter and Infiltration are standard sneaking missions where you progress through a level, taking out guards. First of all, the level design in the Hunter Infiltration missions is pretty much always better than what's in the main campaign. Look how many interesting guard placements, light sources, verticality there is. There's a lot of paths with their own risk-reward playstyles and identity. For example, my favorite is this silo part of the level. It's bathed in light with only small pieces of shadow to hide in. It means you need to be very careful to not get spotted. And there's plenty of areas like this, especially in the later levels. You can't just shoot out every light source. Some you will have to play around, and it leads to challenging and engaging sections, way beyond anything the story mode has to offer. Second off, there's no unskippable story segments. You just get to play the game. Third, there's actually consequences for getting spotted. In Hunter, more guards will spawn in, which makes things more difficult for you, and in Infiltration, it's an instant fail. Fourth, you don't have access to every gadget in the game at once, so it's a little bit more balanced. Now, there are still some issues carried over, such as infinite ammo pistols making the game easy, the weapon loadouts for stealth and action still overtake anything, and you can infinitely restock your ammo stashes. However, because it's at least a bit more challenging, has less interruptions, has actual repercussions for bad performance from the player, Hunter and Infiltration are the best parts of Conviction. You can also co-op these two, which, unfortunately on PC you have to do some workarounds because Ubisoft sucks. Last Stand is kind of boring. You defend an EMP being destroyed by 20 waves of guys, which in theory would be interesting, but there's little to no escalation through the rounds. Everyone is just dudes with guns. You don't get anything like guys who carry shields or set up turrets or even the third echelon agents from the campaign. They're all the same and die with one headshot, so you can just find a power position and pick them off from there. It can be kind of fun if you play it like a third-person shooter, but otherwise there's not much to it. There is a spy versus spy mode, which I didn't play much of back in the day, to be honest, and I can't get footage for it, so I can't comment. You play as Archer from Third Echelon and Kestrel from Voron, who work together to disable EMPs. What most people remember about the campaign is the ending, where Archer is told to kill Kestrel, and this enables a fight between the two characters and players. Having to turn on your friend you spent an entire campaign fighting with was a cool idea and a memorable way to cap off the campaign. I would have liked Spies vs. Mercs to return, but overall this game fares pretty decently as far as additional modes go, and it's the best part of Conviction. Conviction's story is by-the-numbers spy thriller schlock. First off, this game is a sequel to Double Agent version 1. Second off, the story makes no sense. The plot revolves around this man, Tom Reed, who is the head of Third Echelon, the agency Sam used to work for, trying to overtake the US and kill the president because she was going to terminate the agency because it wasn't justifying its funding anymore. So he plans to stage a terrorist attack and use that as an opportunity and cover to kill the president and replace her with the vice president who is also working with Reed. And the enemies you face in the game are either hired mercs or Third Echelon agents that are loyal to Reed. The problem is that the game establishes that Reed has been with Third Echelon since the beginning, but this is the first time we're hearing about him. If he was this crucial to the agency, we would have heard something about him by now. But also, how does he have enough of a reputation to have an entire agency loyal to him? The only Third Echelon agent who isn't is Grimm, and I'll get back to her later. This game takes place 3 years after Double Agent, so you're telling me that Reed gained so many loyal followers in that time that were so loyal to him they were willing to overthrow the US government. I could maybe believe this if we saw more of Reed in the game, and how he interacts with the agency and his men. You know, scenes that would make you understand, oh, this guy is very charismatic or very convincing, and brings a strong morale to the agency, so you would get why the agency sides with him. Or if there was some backstory talking about his previous achievements as the director of Third Echelon, maybe I could buy into it. But there's nothing. As it is in the game, he's just the head of the agency and everybody is buddy-buddy with him for some reason. I guess maybe the people working at Third Echelon didn't want to lose their jobs, which I would understand, but to devote yourself this much to this man who was a nobody before this seems silly. This leads to a villain that has no presence because he rarely appears in the game and people just seem to unconditionally love him. They could have made an interesting character out of someone who used to be a good guy working for the agency, but now the government is turning their backs on him and everything they worked for, so he desperately tries to fight for it. But even then, it's established that the actual reason he wants to kill the US president goes beyond that. He and the vice president work for a shadowy organization named Megiddo, who already have presence and control of the other areas of the world, such as Moscow and Russia, and Beijing and China. And if they kill the US president, then not only do they keep Third Echelon, but they will also control the United States of America. So this wasn't even about him losing his job or agency. He just works with people who want to take over the world. And he's fully aware of this. It's not like he was tricked into doing actions for Megiddo. He works for them and knows what they want. So he goes from being a potentially interesting character of a former good guy who was backstabbed by the US government to just the Illuminati with no interesting motivations beyond, yes, let's control the world. I also struggle to believe Megiddo is as powerful as the game claims because they were beaten by a 54-year-old retired agent and a tech analyst, and after this failed attempt, they never make another attempt to take over the US. Oh yeah guys, we failed to take over the US, let's never try again even though we managed to control China and Russia. As for Sam Fisher himself, there's no continuity between Double Agent and this game. At the end of Double Agent version 1, which is the canon one, he escapes with the SWAT team and takes care of the bombs before the game just abruptly ends. In Conviction, Sam starts at a cafe living off the grid. What was he up to in those 3 years? Play Essentials or read a book to find out, I guess. The one connecting thread between Double Agent and this game is the death of Sam's daughter Sarah, which Grimm gives the name and address of the man who did it, Andrei Coburn, voiced by the legendary Elias Tufexis.
The president! They're gonna take out the president after the EMPs go off! Paralyze the city! Use it as cover for the hit! Tonight!
I actually had the chance to meet Mr. Tufexis, and he's awesome. Anyway, they convinced Sam to do this because his daughter is actually alive. Yeah, they retconned it. It turns out Sarah was alive this whole time and her death was staged because there was a mole inside Third Echelon, and Lambert, Sam's best friend and previous boss, was afraid they would use Sarah to get to Sam, so he faked her death. He got in touch with Coburn to find a body that matched Sarah's, so Sam would believe it, and then made his best friend go on the most dangerous mission of his career in Double Agent. Okay, so why would Lambert do this to Sam? I understand making the agency and the outside world believe that Sarah was dead, but why did Sam have to believe it? Sarah is Sam's whole world, and it's the reason why he took on the job of becoming a Splinter Cell agent. He doesn't care about serving America's interests. Quite often he's sick and tired of the way the government works. But he does this job because he wants to protect his daughter and the world she lives in, and being a Splinter Cell is the best chance he has of doing that. Without her, Sam doesn't really have a reason to do the things he does. He only took on the mission in Double Agent because he believed his daughter was dead, and he had nothing left to lose. Now that reasoning, whilst harsh, makes more sense than Conviction because if Lambert was just concerned with a mole in the agency, he could have just faked Sarah's death, and only he, Sam, and Grimm would have to know the truth. Not to mention, they also told Sarah that her father died, and once again, why do this? Let's say Sam or Sarah were so devastated by the loss of the other that they decided to end it all over the grief of it, which was a strong possibility at least for Sam. This would have backfired so much if that happened. And it would be one thing if it was some random guy who planned this, but it's Lambert, Sam's best friend. Why would he mess with Sam this much? Props to Michael Ironside though, the way he performs this scene is so great. Sam is on the verge of just completely breaking and is barely holding it together.
Sam! Sam! Sam, listen to me! Sam! You have to listen to me. What's done is done. But right now, I need you. I need the Sam Fisher I worked with.
Haven't you heard? He's dead! Just ask my daughter.
In fact, Conviction is some of Ironside's best work as the character. He's able to convey a range of emotions with Sam through subtle changes in his pitch and tone. He can go from a reassuring father teaching his kid to not be scared of the dark.
When it's light, you can't see into a place that's dark. But when it's dark, you can see what's around you much better.
Really?
Really. So if there's monsters or bad people around, you can see them. And if you're in the dark, they can't see you.
I can't see you either. Can you please turn the lights back on?
Okay. Then how about this? There's one really cool thing I didn't show you yet.
There is? Show me.
Okay, here it is. When you're in the dark and your eyes get used to it, you can see all sorts of things around you really well. And then you can do stuff with them.
Like what?
Now take a look at your mobile. You can see it really well, right? If there were monsters standing underneath it, because I can see it, maybe I could make it fall on them and they'd go away.
And it would fall on their heads and they wouldn't be bad anymore?
That's my girl.
To a ruthless old man who is sick and tired, and it all feels natural.
He drove the car that hit your daughter. Used to brag about it, you know? Heard you were coming, so he hired me to kill you before you killed him.
You should refund his money. Where do I find him?
He doesn't have to raise his voice to sound threatening. Plus, Sam still has his sarcastic side, but it's a bit darker due to his cynicism in the game. He really sells this man who has been used and abused by the government too many times and is being strung along by a thread with the only thing he cares about being his daughter. I especially love the line delivery at the end of the game where Sam just sounds done with it all.
Things change, Sam.
Yeah, things change. Remember what you told me, Anna? When this was over, everybody walks. I'm walking.
You can't. There's too much left to do.
Ask Lambert. I've done too much already.
Sam, please. I don't know who else I can trust.
Trust? Funny you should say that. Goodbye, Grim.
Grim is just a completely different character in the game despite having the same voice actress. First of all, her face looks completely different, for some reason. Second off, she goes from being a tech analyst in previous games to a combat-trained leader in 3rd Echelon. She was even given the nickname Ice Queen because of how cold and ruthless she is. In previous games, she was more lighthearted and upbeat, and would often joke around with Sam, mostly making fun of his age. Here, she's all business. Now, the game could have done something interesting with that by having her and Sam reflect on how they've changed since he left 3rd Echelon, and that Lambert's death and Sam's departure forced her to take up the work from them, and in doing so that's where her more lighthearted side died and she was forced to become hardened. But they don't. This isn't character development. In order for a character to develop, you need to establish what causes them to change and become different. But in this game, they just make up a new character, call her Grim, get Claudia Besso to voice her and says, "Hey, it's Grim, you remember her, right?" They could have also had a bit more of Grim's softer side come out when working with Sam again, since the two have history and trust each other. So in working with an old friend, she would regain a part of herself that was lost. There's potential to do interesting stuff with these characters, but the game refuses to go beyond concept. Also, the storytelling in this game is odd. Every level starts with a cutscene of Victor Cost, a friend of Sam, narrating every cutscene. It's just him explaining what's going on in the plot and Sam's mindset from the third person, which once again could be interesting, but he just states the obvious.
So now Sam knew everything. Knew that the best friend he'd murdered had betrayed him for the best reason in the world. Knew that the thing he'd helped Lambert build needed to be utterly destroyed. He was his own man now. And all his ties to his old life were gone.
The game also flashes text on the walls of Sam's memories and emotions and try to show what he's thinking about in the moment, which actually is kind of a neat idea. Basically, Conviction has some concepts that could have made for an engaging spy thriller story inspired by Tom Clancy's works, but it doesn't flesh out any of it and just presents basic broad strokes as a narrative featuring wasted villains with uninteresting motivations, stupid retcons that make no sense, ruining Lambert as a character, changing Grim for no reason, and next to no continuity with previous entries, and it's really only carried by the performances, which are terrific in this game. Double Agent had issues with its story, especially depending on which version we're talking about, but I believe it was overall more engaging than this game. And Chaos Theory, of course, takes the cake for story, characters, and writing. The soundtrack for Conviction is disappointing. And I say that because they brought back Amon Tobin, who was the composer for Chaos Theory, along with Jasper Kidd, but they got him to just do the main theme. Chaos Theory's soundtrack is one of the best in gaming, so to match that again would be difficult, but Conviction's soundtrack, with a few exceptions, is just generic spy thriller music. And even outside of Chaos Theory, the other games have memorable and engaging soundtracks. This is the first Splinter Cell soundtrack that is underwhelming. Really, the only memorable track is Building Steam with a Grain of Salt by DJ Shadow, which plays during Sam's Rage section, but that song wasn't even made for the game. It's a song from 1996 that Ubisoft licensed, and they make good use of it. Otherwise, it's just background noise instead of enhancing the gameplay and cutscenes. The funny thing is, I wasn't expecting to be this harsh when I returned to Conviction. I remember thinking it was my least favorite game in the series, but was still fun, and I still hold that belief to an extent, but after examining the game's design, it really falls apart. The game went through troubled development, originally being shown off in 2007 as a more social stealth nomad-style game with beat-em-up elements and interactable environments, plus Sam had a hobo look with long hair and a beard, but eventually the game got reimagined into the Conviction we have now. Who knows if the original version would have been better. As it stands, whilst there is fun to be had with Conviction, it's lacking in pretty much every area that the previous game succeeded in: gameplay, story, characters, music, etc. Therefore, I consider it the weakest game in the mainline series.